Hello everyone, I'm the storyteller. I know many of you turn to stories like this to unwind and easily drift into sleep. Before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Find a comfortable spot, relax, and let the soothing sounds of rain and wind gently embrace you. As the story unfolds, let it guide you into a peaceful, deep sleep. I had been a park ranger in Blackwood Forest for over 6 years. 6 years of quiet, uneventful daisy-side, from the occasional lost tourist or a curious bear wandering too close to the trails. But one night in 1993 changed everything. I remember that day vividly. The sky was overcast, the air thick and heavy. My assignment was to check on a remote part of the forest, an area so dense and untouched that it wasn't even on most of the maps we handed out at the ranger station. People whispered about this place, strange disappearances, eerie silence, and the unsettling feeling of being watched. Most of these stories were dismissed as superstition, but now, 2 hikers from Portland had gone missing, and despite my boss thinking it was a waste of time, we were sent to investigate. I wasn't alone. Rick, a veteran ranger with over 20 years on the job, was with me. Rick was the type of guy who rarely smiled unless it was at the expense of a rookie ranger. He was tough, blunt, and not easily rattled. That's why, when I saw the look in his eyes later that day, I knew something was seriously wrong. We drove as far as the old logging road would take us before continuing on foot. The trail was overgrown, barely recognizable as a path at all. Towering trees loomed overhead, blocking out much of the daylight. The deeper we went, the heavier the silence became. No birds, no rustling leaves, no signs of life. Then we smelled it, a foul, putrid odor like something rotting, but with an acrid, chemical sting to it. It wasn't the usual scent of decaying wildlife. It was something worse. Rick wrinkled his nose. What the hell is that? I covered my mouth with my sleeve, trying not to gag. I don't know, I muttered, but I don't like it. The farther we walked, the stronger the stench became, until it was almost unbearable. And then we saw it, a small clearing in the woods. In the center stood an ancient tree, its bark blackened and twisted as if burned. But what caught my breath was what hung from its branches. Bones. Small animal bones, strung together with what looked like dried sinew, swayed gently in a breeze I couldn't feel. It was a grotesque wind chime, a warning or maybe an offering. Rick stepped forward, reaching toward one of the bone charms. Don't. I grabbed his arm, my voice barely above a whisper. We shouldn't touch anything. Rick hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, let's keep moving. As we left the clearing, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had disturbed something ancient. Something that had been waiting in the darkness of this forgotten forest for a very long time. And we had just stepped into its domain. We continued down the trail, the dense trees closing in around us. Every step felt heavier, as if the forest itself was pressing in on us. The air was thick, cloying, and each breath felt like I was inhaling something otherworldly. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but there was nothing, just the stillness of the woods. It was around midday when we came across the first body. At first, I thought it was just another animal carcass, maybe a deer that had been picked apart by something hungry. But as we got closer, I realized this was different. The remains were too organized. The bones were meticulously arranged in a spiral pattern, almost as if someone or something had placed them there intentionally. The skull was in the center, surrounded by larger bones, with smaller bones arranged around it in a way that made my skin crawl. Rick crouched down, inspecting the pile with a frown. This ain't no bear. I nodded, my stomach turning. No, something put this here. We both knew it wasn't the work of animals. The bones were arranged with purpose, with too much care for it to be natural. It was a ritual of some sort, but who or what was behind it? I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "We need to keep moving," I said quietly. Rick stood, his face grim. "Yeah, we're wasting time. Those hikers are out here somewhere." We pressed on, the oppressive silence weighing heavily on us. The trees seemed to grow denser as we walked, the shadows longer, more oppressive. The forest felt wrong. The smell was unbearable now, like decay and rot had seeped into the very air. My head began to spin, and I could feel my thoughts starting to fog. Rick seemed to notice too, though he didn't say anything. He kept his hand near his holster, eyes darting around nervously. It wasn't long before we found the second body. This one was fresher, if you could even call it that. The body was in worse shape than the first, its chest cavity torn open, its organs removed. Some of them were shoved back inside like a twisted mockery of a human body. The skin was stretched, dried like leather over the exposed bones. I couldn't look at it for long. It was too much. Rick stood over the body, shaking his head. "God, Hal, this is something else." I swallowed hard, my throat dry, I know. But what the hell is doing this? Rick didn't answer. Instead, he knelt by the body, inspecting the arrangement of bones. It was almost as if the thing that did this wanted us to find it. Suddenly, the air went cold. The forest seemed to hold its breath. It wasn't the kind of silence you hear when you're out in nature, where you can hear every rustle of the leaves or the distant cry of an animal. No, this silence was different. This one pressed on your ears, like the air itself was holding something back. "Rick," I whispered, "do you feel that?" He didn't answer. His gaze was fixed somewhere to the left, his hand now on his sidearm. His lips were pressed into a tight line, and for the first time in the years I'd known him, I saw fear in his eyes. It didn't take long for us to realize we weren't alone. Someone was out there, watching. Rick motioned for me to follow him. We backed away from the body and started heading down the trail, trying to be as quiet as possible. But the deeper we went into the forest, the more intense the feeling became. The sense that we were being stalked, that something was moving just outside the perimeter of our vision. Then we heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from all directions. Rick's face went white. He turned to me and whispered, "We need to move." Now, we broke into a run. We ran through the forest, our breath ragged and shallow, but I could hear the growl growing closer. It was a sound unlike anything I had ever heard. Low, deep, almost inhuman, like a beast that shouldn't exist. The trees, once a source of comfort, now seemed like dark sentinels, their branches creaking and shifting, as though they were alive, watching us, preparing to close in. I tried to focus on the path ahead, my feet stumbling over roots and branches. Rick was ahead of me, his flashlight bouncing wildly as he sprinted, but I could feel the thing, whatever it was, right behind us. My heart pounded in my chest, each thud vibrating through my entire body. The growl was closer now, almost within reach. We burst into another clearing, and for a moment, I thought we were free. The trees parted, and I thought I could see the truck in the distance, our only way out. But then, the growl stopped, and with it, the forest went completely silent. I didn't dare breathe. Rick stopped too, his flashlight aimed at the edge of the clearing. My skin prickled, my muscles tensed. Something was there. I could feel it, like the air itself had thickened around us. A shadow shifted in the trees just beyond the clearing, too quick, too unnatural. I squinted, trying to focus, but whatever it was, it moved too fast for me to catch a glimpse. Then, the growl came again, closer this time, and more menacing. Rick's face was pale, his eyes wide, but he didn't hesitate. He pulled his flashlight down and drew his sidearm, a calm determination setting over his features. "Get to the truck, Hal," he whispered harshly. "I'll cover you." I nodded, not daring to argue, but as I started to turn, the ground beneath me shifted. The air seemed to grow heavier. I heard it before, I saw it. A snapping, cracking noise, a branch breaking under something heavy. Then, a blur of movement. Rick barely had time to react. The thing leaped at him, its dark form landing just inches away. It was massive, too large to be a bear or any other creature I could imagine. Its body was a writhing mass of fur, sinew, and sharp, twisted limbs. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow, and its teeth were impossibly long, glinting in the pale moonlight. Rick's gun went off, but the shot didn't even faze the creature. It lunged, its claws raking across Rick's arm. He grunted in pain, barely managing to push the thing off, but it was far too strong. I froze. The truck, the escape. Everything seemed so far away now. I could see Rick struggling, his gun now useless in his hand. I couldn't just stand there. Instinct kicked in. I turned and sprinted toward the truck, but just as I reached it, I heard a scream, a gut-wrenching human scream that made my blood run cold. It was Rick. I didn't look back. I jumped into the truck, throwing the gear shift into reverse. My hands were shaking, my vision blurry with panic. The engine roared to life, and I slammed my foot on the gas. The tires spun on the gravel before gaining traction, but the sound of Rick's scream echoed in my ears. I didn't stop until I reached the ranger station. I drove through the night, heart pounding, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The truck's engine roared, but it couldn't drown out the sound of Rick's scream ringing in my ears. It was a sound I would never forget, echoing through the woods long after I had left it behind. By the time I reached the ranger station, the sun was starting to rise, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange. But there was no relief in the light of day. The terror that gripped me hadn't loosened. I pulled into the parking lot, barely registering the motion, my mind still back in that forest with Rick. The station was quiet. It always was at this hour, before the shift change. I stumbled out of the truck, my legs shaky, my body still buzzing with adrenaline. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I had left Rick behind, and he was out there, alone, fighting. Or worse. Inside the station, I found the night shift ranger, Mike. He looked up as I entered, his eyes narrowing when he saw the state I was in. "Hal, what the hell happened?" he asked, concern mixing with confusion. I could barely find the words. My voice came out ragged, a broken whisper. "Rick, he's gone. Something's out there, in the woods." Mike stood, his face falling as he saw my condition. My clothes were torn, streaked with dirt and blood, some of it mine, some of it not. I collapsed into a chair, shaking uncontrollably. My mind raced, but all I could think of was Rick. Was he still alive? Had I made the right choice? Running. "We need to go back," I managed, but my voice was so weak it sounded more like a plea than a plan. Mike didn't answer right away. He was silent, his gaze heavy. He had been a ranger for a long time, and he had seen a lot, but this whatever I was describing sounded too far-fetched. He hesitated. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice low, careful. "You saw something, Hal? Something that did this?" I nodded, my throat tight. "It wasn't an animal, Mike. It was something worse." Mike didn't say anything for a long time, just staring at me. He looked like he was weighing his options, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. Then, finally, he sighed. "I'll call it in, but you need to get some rest." He went to the radio, but before he could make the call, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A low, guttural growl, the same one I had heard in the woods. I turned, my eyes wide with terror, but Mike hadn't heard it. He was busy with the radio, talking to the dispatcher, unaware of the growing threat just outside. I stood up, my heart in my throat. The growl came again, louder this time, closer. There was something out there, something that had followed me back to the station. "Mike," I said, my voice trembling, "get ready." But It was already too late. Mike looked at me, confused, then slowly turned toward the window. The growl came again, deep and resonating, shaking the walls of the station. It was unmistakable now. The thing was here. He moved quickly, grabbing his rifle from under the counter, his calm demeanor shattered. "Stay close, Hal," he said, his voice hardening. "We've got to get to the truck and drive out of here." But I didn't want to leave. I couldn't. Not after everything I had seen. Rick. I couldn't just abandon him. Before I could say anything, the lights flickered. The low hum of the station's power system sputtered for a moment, then went dark. We were plunged into complete darkness, the only sound now being the creaking of the building and the distant growl, which seemed to be circling us, getting closer with every passing second. I reached for the flashlight at my side, flicking it on with shaking hands. The beam barely cut through the thick blackness of the station. I heard a door slam in the back of the building, then the unmistakable sound of claws scraping across metal. Mike tensed beside me. "This is no ordinary animal," he muttered under his breath. "Something's out there with a purpose." Then, as if the woods themselves had come alive, the growl turned into something more, a high-pitched screech that sent chills down my spine. It was the sound of something far more terrifying than I could ever have imagined. It was intelligent. It was purposeful. Mike motioned for me to follow him. We rushed to the back of the station, moving swiftly through the dark, trying to stay as quiet as possible. But as we passed through the narrow hallway, a strange, unnatural feeling washed over me. It was like the air had thickened, pressing down on me, and then, there it was, the thing. A shadow moved across the hallway. Massive, hulking, with glowing eyes peering through the darkness. It was a blur of motion, too fast to fully comprehend, but the eyes were unmistakable. The yellow, malevolent glow burned through the darkness, focusing on us. Mike raised his rifle, but before he could fire, the creature moved too quickly and was gone. It darted down the hallway, its claws scraping against the walls. "Move," Mike yelled, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward the back door. I could hear it behind us, its growl growing louder. I turned just in time to see it leap through the shadows, a blur of fur and teeth. It wasn't just hunting, it was playing with us, and it was savoring every moment. We burst through the door, stumbling into the open air. The night was colder than I remembered, and the sound of our heavy breathing was drowned out by the deafening silence around us. But it was only for a moment. Then came the sound of movement in the trees, too many to count. The creature wasn't alone. It was surrounded by others, each one moving with terrifying purpose. A pack, a hunting party. Mike's voice was low, almost defeated. "We're surrounded." I glanced around, heart racing. The truck was too far away. There was no way we could make it to safety. And then I saw it. The clearing, the same clearing I had passed earlier, the one with the bone. There, in the distance, something was standing. A figure, taller than a man, its skin shimmering with a strange, unsettling glow. It turned toward us. I felt my heart stop. "This isn't just an animal," I whispered. "It's something else. Something worse." Mike didn't reply. Instead, he aimed his rifle at the creatures moving in on us. The air felt charged with an unnatural energy, a presence I couldn't fully comprehend. This was no ordinary night. The forest was alive with something ancient and malevolent. The thing in the shadows spoke, its voice rasping, like the cracking of dry wood. "You've come too close." I felt my legs tremble beneath me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Whatever this thing was, it was beyond anything I had ever imagined. Mike's voice was grim as he whispered, "Stay behind me, Hal. This is where it ends." But I knew, deep down, that it wasn't over. This was only the beginning. The figure in the clearing didn't move at first. It simply stood there, towering, its presence almost consuming the space around it. The air grew thicker, colder, and the forest around us seemed to darken even further. My flashlight flickered weakly, as if even the light itself was afraid to shine. Mike's rifle was still trained on the creatures closing in on us, but his hands were shaking now. He was trying to be brave, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He knew we weren't going to survive this. "We have to fight," Mike said, his voice hoarse, but resolute. "If we're going down, we go down fighting." I looked at him, terrified, but nodded. My mind was racing, trying to think of some way out of this, but there was nothing. No escape, no help, just us and whatever these things were. I wanted to run, but something kept me rooted to the spot. The way the shadows shifted unnaturally, the way the trees groaned like they were alive. The very land itself was against us. The figure in the clearing finally took a step forward. The ground trembled beneath its weight, and as it moved, I could see it more clearly. Skin was like liquid silver, shimmering and shifting, as if it were made of starlight and shadow. Its eyes were black, endless voids, and when it looked at me, I felt the ground beneath me give way, like I was falling into an abyss. "Why have you come?" The voice wasn't a whisper, it was a scream that filled my mind, echoing through every nerve and sinew of my body. I couldn't answer. I couldn't even speak. The fear was suffocating, gnawing at my insides. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw something I couldn't believe. The creatures, the ones that had been surrounding us, they froze, their eyes fixed on the silver beam. They were afraid. "This is the one," the creature said, its voice resonating in my chest. "The one you've disturbed. The one you must fight." I could barely breathe. "What do you want with us?" I managed to croak, my throat tight with terror. The silver being's face, or what I assumed was its face, seemed to stretch in a grotesque, almost pitying expression. "We want nothing from you, but you have taken something from us." It raised a hand, and as it did, the forest around us seemed to ripple. The trees bent and twisted, the air itself distorting like a mirage. I felt a cold wind rush through my body, freezing me to the core. I was no longer standing in the forest. I was somewhere else, somewhere darker, and I could hear the whispers, millions of them, filling my mind. "We are the Watchers," the creature continued. "We protect the veil, the boundary between your world and ours. But you have crossed it. You have disturbed the balance." Mike finally lowered his rifle, his hands still trembling. "What do you want us to do?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The Watcher seemed to consider his question, its many eyes flicking between us. "You will defend what remains, the forest. It is ours to guard, but you have seen too much. You must stand with us, or you will be consumed." Before we could react, the air seemed to snap. Time slowed, and in the next instant, I was falling. The ground beneath me opened up, and I was plunged into darkness. The world twisted around me, the earth splitting open as if everything was being torn apart. My mind screamed for answers, for some kind of escape, but there was nothing. I could feel the Watcher's presence, surrounding me, suffocating me. And then, just as quickly as it started, everything stopped. I was lying on the ground, gasping for air. I looked around, and the forest was back to normal, silent, still, as if nothing had happened. I turned to Mike. He was on his knees beside me, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What was that?" Mike whispered. I didn't know how to answer. The silver being, the creatures, the whispers, it all felt like a bad dream, but it wasn't. It was real. "We've been marked," I said, my voice hollow. "The Watchers, they need us." Mike's gaze turned to the trees, his eyes narrowing. What now? I didn't have an answer. I didn't know what we were supposed to do, but I knew one thing for sure. We were no longer just rangers. We were something else, something tied to this dark force that lurked in the woods. And whatever was coming next, we had no choice but to face it. The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. The weight of everything that had happened, everything that had been revealed to us, hung in the air like a storm about to break. I could feel the eyes of the forest on me, as if it were waiting for me to make my next move, waiting to see if I would join the Watchers in their eternal watch or become just another casualty of the forces we had disturbed. Mike was still kneeling, his hand pressed to his forehead, as if trying to clear the fog from his mind. His breath came in short, ragged bursts. He wasn't handling this well, and I didn't blame him. Hell, I wasn't handling it well either. We can't just walk away from this, I said, my voice hoarse. I don't think we have a choice. Mike nodded slowly, still struggling to process the enormity of what had happened. No, we can't. But I don't understand what we're supposed to do. What does defend what remains even mean? I shook my head, equally lost. I don't know, but I think we've been chosen for something. We've been given a role whether we want it or not. We sat there for a long time, in the middle of the silent forest, the cold settling into our bones. I could feel it, whatever it was in the woods. That presence, it was still there, lurking just beyond the edge of my vision, watching us, waiting. Finally, Mike stood up, his face hardening. Let's go back to the station. We need to regroup, figure out what to do next. I nodded, and we made our way back to the ranger station. The eerie stillness of the forest seemed to press in on us, as though it didn't want us to leave. But there was nothing left for us in the woods. At least, not yet. The ride back was quiet. We drove through the winding roads in silence, each of us lost in our thoughts. The sun had dipped behind the horizon, and the night sky was just beginning to stretch across the land. The stars looked distant, too distant, like they were trying to hide from whatever was creeping in the forest. When we reached the station, I was surprised to see a truck parked in front of the building. My heart skipped a beat. There shouldn't have been anyone else here, not at this hour. Mike parked the truck, and we both got out cautiously. I had a sinking feeling in my stomach, as though something was wrong. Something felt off. We walked inside, and the first thing I noticed was the smell. It was faint, but it was there, something rotten, something decaying. And then I saw it. The walls of the station were covered in strange symbols, scrawled hastily in what looked like dark paint. They were old, worn, like they had been there for ages, hidden from sight. Mike, what the hell is this? I whispered. Before he could answer, the door slammed shut behind us. The light flickered, and I could hear it. That low growl, that same horrible sound we had heard in the woods. It was closer now. I turned to Mike, but he was already reaching for his rifle, his face pale with fear. We both knew what was coming. It had followed us. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from the shadows in the corner of the room. It was tall, taller than any man I had ever seen, with long, jagged limbs and a face that seemed to shift in and out of focus. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow, much like the creatures we had encountered earlier. The creature's voice was deep and raspy, as if speaking wasn't natural for it. "You are not alone," it rasped. "The time has come. The veil is thinning." Mike and I stood frozen in place, our hearts racing. We knew we had no chance against this thing, whatever it was. But then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the creature vanished into the shadows, leaving us in the eerie silence of the station. I turned to Mike. What the hell just happened? Mike's voice was shaky, but there was a determination behind it. "I don't know, but I'm not waiting around to find out." Mike and I stood in the dimly lit ranger station, the strange creature's presence still lingering in the air. My pulse raced, and the gnawing fear that had taken hold of me since we entered the forest was now back in full force. The symbols on the walls were unsettling, almost as if they were warning us or calling us. "We need to get out of here," Mike said, his voice steady but strained. "Whatever that thing is, it's not alone. We're in its domain now." I nodded, the urgency of the situation finally hitting me. I had thought that escaping the woods would bring some kind of relief, but instead, it seemed like the forest had followed us here. The creature, or whatever it was, had made it clear that it wasn't finished with us. It had only just begun. We hurried out the back door of the station, weapons in hand, but the air outside felt just as thick as it had inside. I could almost taste the tension in the air, the heavy silence that pressed against my ear, and then I heard it. A faint whisper, so soft it was almost imperceptible. I turned my head quickly, but there was nothing. Just the night, dark and foreboding. Yet, something told me we were being watched. "Al," Mike said, his voice low and cautious. "Do you feel that?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind was too consumed with the creature's words. The veil is thinning. What did it mean? How had we disturbed it so? And more importantly, what was coming next? We kept moving, cautiously, toward the truck, but I could feel the presence, a pull in the back of my mind. The creature hadn't just followed us. It was connected to this place, this forest. It was bound to it. And now, so were we. As we approached the truck, I noticed something strange in the corner of my eye, a shadow moving between the trees. I wasn't sure if it was my imagination or something real, but there was no mistaking the eerie feeling that crawled up my spine. We weren't alone. Mike saw it too. "We need to move. Now," he said urgently, reaching for the truck's door. We both jumped into the truck, but just as Mike started the engine, the lights in the distance caught my eye. They were faint at first, like glowing orbs drifting through the trees. But they were moving toward us, not like headlights of a car, but something else, something unnatural. I gripped the door handle, my heart racing again. "Mike, do you see that?" He glanced over, and his face went pale. "What the hell is that?" The lights grew closer, and now I could hear something whispers, murmurs, in the air. Faint, but persistent, like a chorus of voices all speaking at once. The lights flickered as they approached the truck, casting strange shadows on the ground. Mike floored the gas pedal, but just as we pulled out of the station, the lights vanished, disappearing into the trees as if they had never existed. I exhaled shakily, not realizing I had been holding my breath. Did you hear that?" Mike asked, still staring ahead, trying to keep his composure. "Yeah," I replied, "but I don't think they were lights. That was something else." We drove in silence for a few minutes, but the weight of the unknown pressed down on us. The shadows around us seemed to stretch longer, darker, as if something was moving just out of sight. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being hunted, that whatever had been stalking us was still out there, waiting for the right moment to strike. Mike glanced at me, his eyes wide. "Hal, we're not going back. We can't. Whatever this is, it's too big. It's not just the woods anymore. It's everywhere." I didn't disagree. I had no idea what we were dealing with, but I knew one thing. The forest was only the beginning. The veil, the boundary between worlds, it was fraying, tearing apart. And we were right in the middle of it. We were no longer just park rangers. We were something else. A part of something ancient and powerful that had been lurking just beyond the veil, waiting for the right moment to break through. And that moment had come. The drive was a blur. The headlights cast long shadows across the road, but I barely registered the scenery passing by. The weight of what had happened, of what we had seen, hung over me like a storm cloud that wouldn't break. My mind kept replaying the events, the creature's chilling words. The veil is thinning, and then there was the mysterious figure with the silver skin, that presence ancient and terrible. I couldn't shake the feeling that it had been watching us for longer than we realized, maybe even before we set foot in the woods. It wasn't just a guardian of the forest, it was something far older. Something that had seen the rise and fall of civilizations, and now it had chosen us. I glanced over at Mike. He had his hands on the steering wheel, gripping it so tight his knuckles were white. He was silent, but I could see the strain in his eyes. He was trying to hold it together, but I knew he was just as scared as I was. We were in way over our heads, and the worst part was, we didn't even know what it was. We passed the last signs of civilization, small houses, the occasional diner, but everything felt distant, disconnected. The normal world, the one I had once known, seemed so far away. Mike suddenly slammed on the brakes, and I lurched forward, my seatbelt digging into my chest. Ahead of us, the road was blocked by fallen branches, trees, and debris. What the hell? Mike cursed under his breath, throwing the truck into park. Who did this? I squinted through the windshield, but I couldn't make out anything in the darkness beyond the wreckage. The faintest hint of a figure moving in the shadows caught my attention. I didn't know if it was my imagination or something more real, but my heart jumped into my throat. Mike reached for his flashlight and the rifle next to his seat. "Stay here. I'll check it out," he muttered, his voice strained. "No," I said quickly, panic rising. "I'm coming with you. We stick together." He hesitated, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the debris. "Fine, but be careful." We stepped out of the truck into the cool night air. The ground beneath us was soft, and the trees around us swayed eerily, like they were alive. There was no wind. The only sound was the faint rustling of leaves, a quiet whisper that made my skin crawl. We moved cautiously toward the obstruction, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The shadow I had seen earlier moved again, just beyond the trees. I felt that whatever was out there was toying with us, letting us come closer. The dread that I had been carrying all this time intensified, and my legs felt like lead. Then, from the shadows, a voice whispered. It was soft at first, but it grew louder, more urgent. "You shouldn't have come back." I froze, heart pounding in my chest. Mike tensed beside me, his grip tightening on the rifle. We didn't move, not even to breathe. The figure stepped out from behind a tree, tall and thin, its form shifting in the dim light, like a mirage. Its face was obscured by a hood, but I could feel its eyes on Uskold, calculating. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, it tilted its head, as if sizing us up. "You are in the wrong place," it finally said. "You have stirred what should remain undisturbed." The voice was strange deep, but not human. It had a rasping quality to it, like it had been dragging itself through centuries of decay. "What do you mean?" Mike asked, his voice cracking. The figure's hood fell back, revealing a face that wasn't quite human. Its eyes were black, empty voids, and its mouth stretched wide in a grotesque smile. Its features flickered between human and something else, something alien. "We are the Forgotten," it said, its grin widening. "We were once your kind, but you abandoned us, left us to rot in this place, in this prison." I felt my blood run cold. "What do you want from us?" I repeated, fear surging through me. The figure took a step forward. "We want what is ours. We want what you have taken. The veil, the barrier between worlds. You have torn it, and now it will crumble. And when it does, everything will be free." Mike stepped back, raising his rifle. "Not if we stop you." The figure laughed, a low, echoing sound that sent a shiver through me. "You cannot stop what has already begun. You cannot fight what is already here." It lifted its hand, and the ground beneath us trembled. The air thickened, and I could feel it, the pulse of something ancient and powerful, surging in the earth, in the trees. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just some random monster. It was a force, a being that had been waiting for this moment. Suddenly, the creature lunged. Everything seemed to happen at once. The figure lunged with terrifying speed, its limbs stretching unnaturally long, its mouth opening wide in an almost inhuman grin. Mike fired, but the shot seemed to pass through the figure, as if it wasn't quite there, like it was a shadow, or something more. intangible. I barely had time to react before the creature was upon us. Its cold, black eyes locked onto mine, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if something deep inside me was trying to scream but couldn't. My body froze, the rifle in my hands useless. Mike wasn't frozen though. He fired again, but the creature swiped at him with such force that he was sent sprawling to the ground. His rifle flew from his hands, skittering across the gravel. I snapped out of my stupor, heart hammering in my chest. I grabbed for the flashlight and threw it at the figure, but it passed straight through, like it wasn't even real. My mind was racing. This thing, it wasn't just an enemy. It was something else, something far beyond us. It reached for Mike, its long fingers curling like claws around his neck. Mike gasped, struggling to break free, but the creature's grip was ironclad. His face turned red, his breath coming in ragged gasps. I couldn't think. The terror was suffocating, but somewhere, deep down, I knew I had to do something, anything. I grabbed a rock from the ground, and with all the strength I could muster, I hurled it at the creature's head. To my surprise, the rock struck the thing, but instead of bouncing off, it seemed to make contact with something solid, something real. The creature hissed, its eyes flashing, and for a moment, it loosened its grip on Mike. Mike gasped for air and scrambled away. "Run," he yelled, his voice hoarse. I didn't need to be told twice. We both bolted toward the truck, but I could hear it, the creature's growl, loud and menacing, behind us. It was getting closer, and it wasn't alone. Something else moved in the shadows, just out of sight. Shapes shifting in the darkness. More of them. Mike jumped into the driver's seat, his hands trembling as he started the engine. I was about to hop into the passenger side when I turned and saw them, dozens of figures, their glowing eyes reflecting the light from the truck's headlights. They were moving toward us, walking with that strange, unsettling gait. Shadows, beasts, things that shouldn't exist. "We can't outrun them," I shouted, panic rising in my chest. Mike slammed his foot on the accelerator, the truck lurching forward, but the creatures were too fast. They surrounded the truck, moving with unnatural speed, clawing at the sides, their screeches and growls filling the air. The sound was deafening, like 100 voices screaming in unison. I grabbed the rifle on the floor, fumbling with it, trying to aim, but I knew it wouldn't do anything. Nothing would stop them. We were trapped. And then, in the distance, I saw it, a light brighter than anything I had ever seen. It wasn't from the moon, or a streetlight, it was something else. A blinding flash that cut through the darkness, like a beacon of hope or a warning. The creatures froze. Their movements halted, their eyes flickering as if something was pulling them back, keeping them at bay. Mike and I exchanged a look, both of us wondering what the hell was going on. I didn't wait for an answer. I slammed my foot on the gas again, speeding toward the light. Whatever it was our only chance. The truck barreled down the road, the creature still close behind, but the light grew brighter, closer. It wasn't long before we reached it. As we pulled into the clearing, I saw it standing there, tall and silver, the same figure we had seen before, the Watcher. But now, it was different. There was a power about it, something that made the air hum with energy. The Watcher raised a hand, and the creatures, those twisted beings, stopped, their eyes no longer filled with hunger. They were frozen, held in place by something beyond our understanding. The Watcher turned to us. Its voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable weight to it. "You have disturbed the balance, but you are not alone now. You have crossed into our world, but so have we." "What are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" The Watcher didn't answer right away. Instead, it lifted its hand, and the creatures, whatever they were, began to dissolve. They turned to ash, their forms crumbling into nothingness, fading into the night. "You are chosen," the Watcher said finally. its voice like thunder in my chest, to stand against the darkness. The veil is thinning, and it will not stop, but you together will fight? I was speechless. The Watcher's words echoed in my mind. The veil is thinning. The world was unraveling. The creatures were only the beginning. Mike and I looked at each other, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw a flicker of something resolve, determination. We fight, I said quietly. Mike nodded, a small but resolute smile tugging at his lips. We fight. The Watcher regarded us for a long moment, its glowing eyes filled with an ancient wisdom. The battle is far from over, it said, its voice steady but filled with an eerie gravity. You are now bound to this world, bound to its protection. The darkness will come again, and it will bring with it forces you cannot even begin to understand, but you have the strength to stand against it. I wasn't sure what it meant, but I felt the weight of its words, pressing down on me like the very earth was shifting beneath my feet. We weren't just dealing with the woods anymore. We were up against something much older, much darker. This was the beginning of a war, one that stretched beyond anything I had ever known. What do we need to do? Mike asked, his voice grim but determined. The Watcher's form shimmered for a second, and then it spoke again. You must find the source. It is where the veil is weakest, where the Dark Ones seek to enter your world. You will need to prepare. You must gather what you can: strength, allies, and knowledge. It extended its arm toward the forest, and the trees around us seemed to stir, bending slightly as if they were responding to the Watcher's call. There are others like you, those who are chosen. Seek them out, learn from them. Together, you can fight. I swallowed hard. How do we find them? Where do we start? The Watcher didn't answer right away. Instead, it stepped forward, and as it did, the forest around us seemed to pulse, like it was alive. You will know. The forest will guide you. The veil will thin further before the final battle. You will see what lies hidden from the eyes of most. And then, without warning, the Watcher began to fade. Its silver form dissolved into the night, leaving only the faintest shimmer behind. For a moment, there was complete silence. The night was still. The creatures were gone, and I realized that, in that brief instant, everything had changed. Mike and I were no longer just two rangers patrolling a forest. We were protectors, bound to this ancient battle, standing between two worlds, and the terror we had witnessed, it was only the beginning. The following days were a blur of preparation. Mike and I kept in touch, each of us trying to make sense of what had happened. We spoke to no one else. There was no way to explain what we had seen, what we had become part of. But we knew one thing: we couldn't let this go. The Watcher had given us a task, and we had no choice but to follow through. We spent hours researching anything we could about the veil, the creatures we had encountered, and the ancient forces that the Watcher had warned us about. It was clear that this was bigger than us, but together we could fight. Mike, ever the practical one, began to train. He honed his skills with weapons, not just guns, but the knowledge of how to fight, how to survive in this world that was slowly becoming more alien. I focused on learning the powers I had been given, the ability to see through the veil, to sense the shifts in the fabric of reality. It was like tapping into a deeper consciousness, one that had been dormant within me all my life, but no amount of preparation could truly ready us for what we would face. We couldn't predict when the next incursion would happen, but we knew it was only a matter of time. It wasn't long before we found them, the others, people who had been touched by the same forces, awakened to their new roles. We met in secret, shared our experiences, and trained together. Each of us brought something different to the table. Each of us had been chosen for a different reason, but we all shared the same goal: to fight back against the darkness. The day came when the veil finally began to tear. The ground shook, the skies darkened, and the creatures, those twisted things we had seen before, began to spill into our world. But this time, we weren't alone. The Watcher returned, and with it came others forces of light and darkness, watching, waiting, and guiding us. Together with our allies, we stood at the edge of the forest, preparing to face what was coming. The creatures were growing bolder, more aggressive, their forms shifting in and out of existence. But we fought, and we pushed back. The final battle was chaos. The creatures tore through the forest, but we held our ground. With every strike, we tore at the fabric of reality itself. And in the end, after what felt like an eternity, the creatures began to retreat. The veil, although damaged, held firm. We had won, but the victory came with a price. The Watcher, standing in the center of the battlefield, looked at us with something akin to pride. "You have done well," it said, its voice like thunder. "But this war is not over. It will never be over. The balance will always be at risk, and you will always be needed." I looked around at the faces of my new allies, people who had come from all walks of life, drawn together by a common cause. And as I stood there, battered and bruised but alive, I knew one thing: this was only the beginning. The darkness would always be waiting, but as long as there were those willing to fight, we would always stand. The Watcher turned to me, its form flickering with fading light. "You have proven yourself. Now, you will continue the watch. The veil may thin again, and when it does, you will be ready." And as the creature disappeared into the ether, I realized what had changed. I had changed. The fear, the uncertainty, was still there, but now it was tempered by something stronger. I wasn't just a park ranger anymore. I was a guardian. Years have passed since that night, and the world has returned to its quiet, predictable rhythm. But I'm different now. The memories of that battle, the creatures we faced, and the allies we made are always with me. Sometimes, when the wind is just right, I can feel the presence of the Watcher, a faint pull in the air, as if reminding me that the darkness never truly goes away. I still walk the forests, still stand watch, and whenever I hear something in the distance, something unnatural, something that shouldn't be there, I'll be ready. The veil is thin, but I am ready to defend it.